Welcome everybody who is tuning in to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining. We're really excited to talk about this kind of novel planting technique. We wanted to do this webinar largely to focus on people that are row crop growers and they want to explore kind of a different type of CBD or cannabinoid production method. It doesn't mean that if you're not a row crop farmer, you shouldn't be here, but we really wanted to give those type of growers an opportunity to kind of explore the CBD world in a way that may fit a little bit better with their system. So we wanted this to be, you know, a really great learning opportunity in these kind of uncertain times for everyone to look at this alternative approach to the clones and feminized seed model. So we're going to look at direct seeding, mechanized production, and how it fits in this row crop system. We'll talk about regulation, but we'll also focus on, you know, our kind of quad state, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois specific information as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'll start out the beginning of this talking about what we know about genetics in hemp, and particularly on controlling the amount of THC. This is the outline here. So I'm Dr. John McKay. I'm a professor at Colorado State University working on plant genomics, and I'm also a co-founder of New West Genetics, who you'll be hearing from a few people from there later. Okay, so just to jump into it, the idea of this slide here, where you see years across the x-axis and yield of maize on the y-axis, is to hopefully convince everyone that breeding is useful and necessary for increasing yield and maximizing productivity. So really the major revolution in corn breeding was starting to create hybrid corn and doing serious science and database breeding, which started about 50 years ago and has led to very large gains. So the idea is this needs to be done in every crop species to create varieties adapted for US production environments. So hemp or cannabis sativa is a dioecious species, which is rare for plants, but this has both separate male and female individuals like humans or cows. It also has very small pollen. It's about a quarter of the size of maize pollen. And so pollen moves around, and thinking about controlling pollen and breeding both sexes is necessary for breeding and genetics. Across the entire species, so cannabis sativa is one species, and hemp is defined as varieties of cannabis sativa that have a THC content below 0.3%. This figure here just shows the amount of variation in the species, and that there's lots and lots of variation in the species. Here we're showing 16 million common variants across the species, and there's lots of variation within the low THC hemp varieties, which is very useful for the purposes of breeding better hemp. So as you probably know, many traits are controlled by both the environment and the DNA or the genetics. And that's true for traits in hemp as well. But the point of this slide is that cannabinoids actually are highly controlled by genetics. You'll often hear people say that slight differences in growing conditions can affect cannabinoid content and make crops go from low to high THC. And that is not correct, and there are no data supporting that. These are data that were actually published. I'll give you the reference in the next slide, but this just breaks down the amount of variation in traits in hemp as a function of genotype, environment, and the G by E interaction. So yield, as you probably all know, is highly influenced by the environment, And you also see a lot of this G by E, where the yield of a given genotype is highly sensitive to where you grow it. The same exact experiment here with multiple stable European varieties. The data are shown for THC on the right, and you can see the big difference there is that the influence of environment is extremely small. The influence of genotype goes up, and there's much less G by E as well. So you can breed for low, stable THC, as they've been doing for these European varieties I'm showing you here. Okay, so these data are just to tell you that we now understand quite a bit about the genetics of cannabinoid production. So on the plot on the left, the x-axis is the amount of CBD in a given plant, and on the y-axis is the amount of THC. And all of these dots are plants that came out of individual bags of seeds. So this is a trial from Cornell University where they acquired a bunch of different supposed hemp high CBD lines and grew them out, and they genotyped them at the marker that converts CBG to either THC or CBD. That pathway is shown in the right there. And what they figured out is the reason all of these high CBD hemp crops that they grew are not hemp or above that 0.3 threshold is because they have the genes to make lots of THC. And they used a simple genotyping test to show this. And that citation, Toth et there, is shown at the bottom. Both of these papers are available to anyone if you use those DOIs. And then finally, if we look at the genetic idiotypes on the market right now, people are using, basically two density type approaches, either using clones or feminized seed and planting at very low density, and then doing a lot of work to maintain, to control weeds and hand harvest the plots, or the alternative approach is what people have been doing more in Europe and Canada for grain production and growing plants at much higher agronomic densities. So like soybean, hemp yields start to flatten slightly above 100,000 plants an acre. And so planting any less than 100,000 plants an acre is going to reduce yield as well as make it harder to manage and harvest the crop. So this is an annual species, and the idea here is you plant it by seed every time you put that population out every year. So that's all I wanted to introduce, and we can move on in the timeline here.
Yeah, I'm Rich Fletcher, and I'm the director of breeding of New West Genetics, as well as a founder. So today I'm going to be talking about agronomy, equipment, and then get into expand on what John talked about as far as genetics a little bit. Next slide. So we started our company over 6 years ago, and really just want to give you an idea of the strategy at that point. Essentially, it was to combine the agronomy traits existing in dioecious grain types with the high cannabinoid, high CBD genetics available in the nascent CBD market at that time. And so the idea was to be able to scale production of cannabinoids simply by mechanizing it. But of course, mechanical production requires the right crop morphology, and so that's where breeding comes in. So the idea here is that cannabinoid production can actually be done using either type, and it is being done. Feminized production is pretty much dominant here in the US today, feminized and clonal. But the Canadians and Europeans have been producing CBD using dioecious types for a little while now. And so each of them have their advantages and disadvantages, which we'll talk about. So, when we look at the feminized market, the The advantages, that's where high CBD, high cannabinoid genetics exist today. But anyone who's grown that in that system will pretty much acknowledge it's a pretty management intensive crop. Seed and clones are expensive, a lot of hand labor today. And as John highlighted earlier, there's some risk there. Much of the genetics available end up not being compliant for THC. On the other hand, dioecious production, really the big gap today, the agronomy is mostly figured out. The big gap today is just high CBD genetics, which is the problem we're looking to solve. There are some harvest challenges, which we'll acknowledge and talk about later, but there is this upside of a co-product being the grain, which does have value and can bring extra income to the farm. Okay, so just to talk about feminized production a little bit, I mentioned expensive seed and clones, and that's mostly just the fact that these are produced in the greenhouse, and greenhouse space is expensive. The price of feminized seed has come down considerably in the last few years, from $5 a seed to 30 cents a seed. But that still translates to about $10,000 a pound. So, if you think your corn seed is expensive, you can think again a little bit on that. But really doing this indoors means that the cost of production is really going to be, sort of have a limit to how low it can go. It's going to be more expensive than producing seed in the field. And so we have heard, this is translated to growers typically starting seeds in the greenhouse and transplanting. We have heard about growers who have direct seeded, but generally this has not gone too well. Overall germination rates in feminized seeds are pretty low. The vigor is pretty low. And in my experience, this is just the fact that it's being produced in greenhouses. I spent 18 years breeding canola and 6 years in hemp, and it's pretty well established that greenhouse seed is going to be lower quality than field produced seed, which is, between the cost of production and quality, that's why your corn and soybean seed is made in the field. Next slide. So just talk about the risks. We're talking about some pretty expensive planting inputs. So first thing is most feminized seed providers are not, in fact, I don't know of any that are guaranteeing 100% female seed. So if the goal is to keep pollen out of the field, there'll be a necessary investment in roguing. A single male can do a lot of damage. It's a prolific pollen distributor, and so it can make a lot of seed from even a single male making its way through. You may end up with a fully feminized field and your neighbor grows a dioecious field, or you have feral plants and still end up with seed. Planting at low density, the cost of seed or clones, the idea is to seed at low density, maximize yield per plant. But this creates some challenges. There's a lot of bare ground out there, a lot of weeds to control. Plants get bigger, and that reduces harvestability. And then bigger plants mature later, so now you're dealing with frost risk. We talked about genetics. Most of the genetics today, and I'll show this later, will go over that 0.3 threshold available eventually. And so it's pretty standard practice for growers to test for THC content up until harvest, just so that if it does get close, they can cut it. And it just adds a lot of stress at an already stressful harvest time. So just a quick blurb on feminized harvest methods. The takeaway here is there's a lot of hand labor being involved, whether that's literally dragging single plants into a drying facility to quote unquote cure, which is a pretty standard method in marijuana production. Some producers are mechanizing by hand feeding single plants into commercial combines. Recently, we have heard about the use of stripper heads, which I think is gaining some traction. I have heard that the bushiness of the plants leaves some of the yield on the plant. It actually can't access the back part of the plant, which would require another pass through the field. And then there are some guys who are actually wet baling with a silage chopper, but there's some downside to that because the stems and leaves have lower cannabinoid content, and so your quality will go down. Okay, so let's talk about row cropping for CBD production. So the idea here is just to build on what we know about row cropping hemp today. Starts with direct seeding, which obviously requires high quality, high germ seed. We're recommending a seed spacing of 2 inches within the row, and then your final plant population is really going to be dictated by what row spacing works best on your farm. If you think you have low weed pressure or can control weeds prior to planting, then you may be more comfortable with a tight row spacing and getting that canopy established early. Alternatively, you might be more used to cultivating where a wider row spacing is more comfortable. But talked a lot about weed control here over the last few slides, and that's really because there aren't any labeled herbicides for hemp today, at least not traditional synthetic herbicides that are not necessarily broad spectrum. This is other countries do have hemp herbicides labeled, and so we expect that they're coming, but until that happens, we're going to have to rely on traditional approaches. In our experience, this is a manageable problem. So as far as inputs, overall, the story here is it's going to be a lower input crop than corn, less water, less fertilizer. We do look at it as a true dual purpose crop. When we look at flour and grain yields by cropping them together, we don't see a huge drop off, if at all, in yields of farming them independently. So not much of a trade-off there. There certainly are some challenges in this approach, particularly in harvest. So I think getting the seed in the ground and to harvest is more or less like managing most other row crop species. But harvest is definitely where things change a little. And so we'll just talk about those challenges here in the next couple slides. So first, there are a couple major considerations here, and these are going to apply whether you're growing an all-female field or a dioecious field. The first is drying, and this may be obvious to those of you on this call, but if you're wet cutting this flower product, it's going to be about 70% moisture, and so it's going to be imperative to get that drying quickly because it will mold or rot pretty quickly in the heat. And then the other one is trichome preservation. So trichomes are these little hairs on the female floral tissue, and they are the primary site of cannabinoid biosynthesis, and so that's where they're most concentrated. They are fragile, and if you lose them, you are lowering your cannabinoid content. So every aspect of production that I'm going to talk about here needs to consider minimizing their loss. So I'm just going to talk about a few methods of harvest that we have direct experience with. The first would be windrowing. And so this is obviously going to be something that you could do in a drier climate like we have here in Colorado. Essentially, windrow the crop like you would any other windrowed species. And so this is what we did last summer. essentially picked up that windrow with a modified combine. It had a pickup header on it and collected a seed and flower bulk. As far as the combine modifications, there are several ag engineering farms or firms making these modifications today. The details of the modifications will vary by make and model, but essentially it comes down to lowering fan speeds, adjusting sieves, and directing what would normally be chaff into that seed flower bulk. But the advantage here really is now we're drying in the field and removing that cost from the production. One important point is, if possible, cut as directly below the cola or the head of the plant as possible, just to minimize the amount of stem going into the combine. You've probably heard, but hemp fiber is strong stuff, and it will find a place to wrap in a combine if it can. So less is more. And part of the combine modifications is really making some adjustments to the beater bar and other wrapping points. So a couple of wet harvest methods. Stripper header, I mentioned earlier, is really gaining popularity, and it all focuses around what I was just talking about, fiber. I think it's, it strips the seed and flower off of the stalk and leaves most of the fiber in the field. But this is going to be, a wet harvest method, and that drying consideration becomes important here. And then silage chopping. This is a sort of a brute force approach, but essentially could chop the top of the plant up into pieces, and obviously you'll be dealing with more fiber in your seed and flower bulk. So post-processing methods, mentioned drying. The good news is there are large-scale continuous flow drying options available. I know the alfalfa industry uses them, and as well as other forage species. There are some hemp-specific options being made available today. Not 100% sure how they're different. I know a lot of them are mobile, which is convenient, but I do think they charge a premium for that. An important consideration in drying in this dual purpose model we're presenting here would be grain quality. There'll obviously be an upper limit to the temperature you could apply to this bulk before you start seeing some degradation in the grain quality. We have heard of growers using their drying grain bins. Not so sure how well that would work. Those are more for taking 20% grain to 10, not 70% biomass to 10. So maybe some questions there. But when we look at the hops industry, they've been drying. It's made a critical component to their production system. So there's probably some learnings to be had there, and could serve as an adequate model. So most of what I've talked about, all of what I've talked about, would be bringing in a seed flower bulk, seed flower stem bulk. And so seed and stem have no cannabinoid content, and effectively we want to take the seed or the grain to a different market. So we need to separate them. And there is existing equipment, large scale equipment to do this. What we did last year is simply run the bulk through a rotary screen, and then follow that up with running it through an aspirator and use density and air to separate them. And we ended up with a really nice, clean product. Back to the trichomes, we really need to keep an eye on loss. Every time you handle this flower, once it's dried, there's an opportunity for loss. And so I think that's really the big advantage of doing these steps indoors. We can set up bag houses and other vacuum systems to capture what looks like harmless dust, but it ends up being really expensive dust. And so it's worth capturing and adding back to the final product. Okay, so on to some genetics. So here's some data from Cornell. Essentially, they grew high CBD genotypes in a randomized replicated experiment and found that all of them ended up going over that 0.3% THC threshold. They also found that none of them had CBD content over 6.5%. So I think these were mechanically threshed, but sort of supports what we saw last year in one of our trials. We grew some of our experimental varieties relative to 10 genotypes we bought online, and found that 8 of those 10 ended up going over that 0.3 threshold. An important point here, if you look at the far right column, that's the number of days to flower. And you can see these were all very late flowering genotypes. We harvested them earlier probably than their full maturity. And so the point there is the THC content would have gone up. A traditional or a commercial CBD farmer would have been testing these and cut them earlier, which means that those CBD contents actually probably would have gone down. But really a big point here is if we look at competitor 3, one of the blue genotypes towards the bottom of the table, the CBD content was 1.6%, and we paid $2.50 per seed for these things. So just kind of highlights the buyer beware nature of seed sales today. Okay, so the point of this slide is as we were driving around, breeding sites throughout Colorado, as we were driving around, we saw a lot of rough-looking fields with really low stand establishment, slow growing plants, and I would say generally low yield potential. So I think there were some tough learnings out there this year. So just a couple words on the seed availability in these and differences in these two markets. This feminized clonal market has really taken on sort of a gold rush mentality, try to make as much as possible while they can. When we look at breeding pedigrees of what's being sold, mostly could be defined as a mystery. We know that genetic fingerprinting has shown that the same genotype can be sold under many different names, and then the same genotype sold by different seed suppliers can actually be quite different. So if we look at the very first red line there, competitor 1, Cherry Blossom, the CBD content of that version of Cherry Blossom was 1.9%. And at the very bottom, the CBD content of the other version of Cherry Blossom was 8.2. And so, and when you look at these plants in the field, they look very different. And so a varietal name is really specific to the seed seller and is not universal. So the idea is most of these breeding pedigrees are somewhat of a mystery. Seed sellers have a hard time holding themselves accountable and standing by their product because they really don't know what they have. Alternatively, the dioecious grain industry has followed a much more traditional agricultural approach and utilized intellectual property protection, patents, and breeders' rights. They're selling certified seed. And really the idea here is, as John talked about earlier, we need breeding to advance this industry, and the only way breeding works is for the investment in these varieties to be recovered and reinvested. We're early days here. Pests are going to arrive, pathogens, and so there are genetic mechanisms to control them, but we need to invest in them. So on that topic, just a quick overview of where we're headed. We currently are selling grain types under the Elite brand name, and we have this CBD row crop type under the Abound brand name. But as we look towards the future, there will be improvements in CBD content. We're working on a zero THC variety that further minimizes risk to the grower and really makes the extraction process more streamlined, so that THC doesn't have to be removed post extraction. Have found a trait that skews the number of females in a population from 50% towards 90%, and since the females make all of the useful marketable product, that's an immediate yield gain. And then looking at some rotation options with frost tolerant varieties. So this is my last slide. This is for the growers out there. As you look to make decisions on what to grow on your farm, what's most adapted, we suggest you use university yield trial data. More and more universities are doing these. We know of several more this year. So it's likely somebody in your region will have data. These are going to be the most reliable data, the best experimental designs, and the most objective reporting. So look for more public data to help you make your decisions. I think that's all mine. Thanks.
My name is Brian Kuntz. I'm with the Department of Agriculture. I've been with the department for 11 years. I've only been the program manager for hemp for the last year, but I've since 64 passed in Colorado. In 2012, I've been immersed in cannabis, whether it be marijuana or hemp. Marijuana, we're mostly concerned about pesticides used for the crop, and hemp, of course, it's mostly THC. So anyway, I've kind of put together a few slides to talk about kind of what happened in Colorado this year. Some of the challenges of regulating it, some of the issues we've seen. So I don't know how relevant this is, except that our program has grown quite a bit in the last 5 years, from essentially 2 people to 5 regular staff and a couple others, and 20 inspectors that are regularly collecting samples, and an increased lab staff we do analyze all our own samples for regulatory purposes. So the program does have 4 main components. There's registration. I think one of the biggest questions this year has been, where are we at? I know we had a meeting yesterday with the state hemp regulators, and I think most states were, a lot of them, this is their first year, so they really had nothing to gauge on versus last year. I know that Kentucky and a few others are about the same. We're a little above. It looked like we were well above in January, and in February up to 40 or 50% last year, but it's the rate slowed down a lot in March. However, we do get over 60% of registrations just in the months of April, May, and June, despite the fact that we have an open enrollment or open registration season year round. The program also does require reporting. That's a big challenge for us and for registrants. I have a few slides about that, but there seems to be this on the growing side of things a tendency to get the registration, get the legal right to cultivate, and then not pay so much close attention to the reporting. And then, of course, towards the end of the season, by the time August comes around, we have to come up with a sampling plan and start sampling, preferably in the last several weeks of the crop's life before it's harvested, which is normally, I would say the peak season for us is probably, in Colorado, is probably the 3rd week of September, but it could be anywhere from the 1st or 2nd week all the way till the end of October. And then, of course, there's enforcement. So we have to try to keep people focused on doing the reporting. I've got a few more slides about enforcement coming up, so we can keep going on. We also on the registration, we have commercial or research and development. Currently, the only research and development registrations we issue are to institutions of higher education. This dual registration presumably is going to go away just because the new federal requirements don't have any provision for research and registration, although we commented very strongly that in our comments to USDA. The business name should be in good standing with the Secretary of State. That's something we verify through our Secretary of State, or if it's an out-of-state company through their Secretary of State. And we do require certain information about, the principal people in the business, the person's name, the title, addresses and phone numbers, and really any authorized person controlling authority that has at least 10% ownership. Yeah, so in the registration process, a lot of what we do as far as collecting information is similar to, almost identical to what the USDA is requiring. We've always required a physical address, dimensions of the land area, the GPS coordinates, which include the legal description or the township range section, and a map of registered land area. The fee has been and currently is $500 per registration. Outdoor is charged by $5 an acre, and indoor is charged by $3 per 1,000 square feet. We do citizen verifications on sole proprietors if it's not a corporation, and they do require signatures. I talked about reporting a little bit. When you register, we are pretty good about keeping up 30 days. I don't know what other states. I think that's been that was a big growing pain for us, especially last year when our program tripled by 3 times, almost 2.5 times. Was trying to get registrations issued within 30 days. We do have to renew every year. We don't issue registrations for more than 1 year or 2 years. So once your registration expires, you do need to register it, and you can't put a plant in the ground until you get a certificate issued. There was some confusion on that, has been confusion on that, but you absolutely should ensure that your growers have some sort of legal certificate from their state Department of Agriculture before they plant. The planting, I talked about reports. So anytime somebody plants, and here's the definitions of it, it's seedlings, cuttings, cultures, transfer of plants into a registered land area, that has to be recorded or reported to us within 10 days. And the harvest is when a plant's cultivated or moved into a registered land area from another location, and those also have to be reported to us within 30 days prior to harvest, or 30 days prior to doing that. We do have an avenue for folks to amend that if they report to us. Sometimes things change, weather events, planning, whatnot. So as long as that's communicated with us prior to this happening, we do allow registrants to change this. The pre-planting report is really just the intended use for hemp. So when somebody registers in our state, they also have to include maps and what their intended varieties are. It's not uncommon for that to change by the time they actually plant. I think I mentioned the planting report has to be within 10 days of planting, and the harvest days within 30 days of harvesting. We do provide an inclusion report for folks that have a current registration and still have plants in a greenhouse, or volunteers in a field that are renewing a registration. We do have our inspection and sampling is risk and random based, more or less. Recently we do try to randomize the whole population of hemp growers, and also include folks who tested above 0.3% the previous year, just to make sure there's not like a trend with the same person. It's largely random, but risk can involve anything from Again, people who cultivated hot hemp in the past to folks that aren't doing their reporting or appear to not be playing by the rules. Inspections do occur mostly in September, October, and we currently have been collecting the top 2 inches of flowers from multiple plants throughout a field to try to get a composite sample of one variety and taking them back to the lab. We are considering amending that now that the USDA has actually, they recommend collecting flower material, but up to from the top third of the plant, so that does allow for a little bit of variability, I believe, on the amount that's clipped from the top of the plant. One question we get a lot is about the THC, testing, and we do test for total delta-9 THC. I think a lot of the confusion in the industry revolves around the fact that most hemp growers that get their crop tested, within several weeks prior to harvest will get it tested with liquid chromatography versus gas chromatography. As a lot of you may know, liquid chromatography test, the results are presented with the cannabinoid profile, which includes not only THC, delta-9 THC, but also the acid. It will include the different cannabinoids like CBN and CBG and others. And there is a formula to take the total delta-9 THC and add it to delta-9 THC multiplied by 0.877, the THC acid. So that's how you come up with total THC. We actually use gas chromatography, so it just gives us one reading. We heat it up to 320 degrees or 340 degrees and get our total reading. And the lab turnaround this last season was about 3 weeks. Actually, the 3 weeks wasn't just, that was from the time the sample was collected in the field till the time the result came back. That is a growing pain. It's a growing pain for a producer who's trying to get their crop out of the field and to market or get it stored, or needs to get it harvested. It goes through the cost of harvesting the crop, and then finding out 3 weeks later that that was all for none. That they probably could have saved a lot of money just by disking it or tilling it in. And then we do charge additional fees for invoicing and sampling. I think that one challenge is going to be that doing 100% sampling, we're going to have to coordinate, or we will coordinate with other third-party labs on the cost of this. I think most of the people I've talked to said they could probably stay within that range. Okay, so we selected 26% of all the registrants this last year. We have approximately 2,700 of them. There were 649 crops inspected. There were 590 samples collected. Out of the samples collected, 99 of them were above the allowable rate. In our state, we accept anything up to 0.39, but when it gets to 0.4, we do require them to dispose of it. So that percentage has gone down over the last 5 years. It's been anywhere from 20 to 30% in the past. The non-compliant hemp is above the THC was very small. Only 11 of those was above 1% THC. And fortunately, or unfortunately, 67 folks were able to waiver from discipline, meaning if they did not exceed 1% and they were willing to dispose of the crop on their own farm and demonstrate that, not let it go to market, et cetera, they were waived from any kind of fine or penalty or ability to re-register. Okay, so the total acres is about 2,000, 32 counties in our state. This probably doesn't really relate to your state that much. I guess the only point of this slide is it was relevant in Colorado. And of course, with 100% sampling, that number from 2,000 acres could go to 10,000 acres or better. These are the varieties that tested hot this last season. I just want to clarify that these are not banned in any way or prohibited. As noted earlier by CSU, any one of these varieties can test within range or above range. Really, the purpose of these slides is to show that it's probably more of an indication of just what more of the common varieties that are being planted are. But every one of these did test it at least once above at 0.4 or above. So the next slide, I think, also has more varieties. Anyway, those were the ones largely that tested hot. Again, many of those also tested within compliance ranges. The biggest issues we had within our state as far as compliance issues were we're cultivating without a registration. That goes on. We work very closely on self-reporting or with law enforcement. So, and often folks will just fail to do it the right way. But that's certainly a culpable violation, is to grow it without any kind of authority. Failing to submit planting reports and harvest reports, as I mentioned earlier, seems to be an issue. I don't know if it's absent-mindedness or not understanding the rules clearly, but that's something that we are enforcing, and we're trying to reinforce into people's heads that this is something that needs to happen. And then they are required to respond to notifications from us or our inspectors within 10 days that they're going to be inspected. And sometimes that takes a little longer than it should. And of course, the exceeding the 0.3% THC, and that's kind of the crux of the program. And then there are sometimes issues with folks failing to pay for inspections and sampling. We also have issues where, somebody might refuse to provide us with the ability to inspect at all, or to provide the information we ask for, and failure to provide any information required for requested by the commissioner. These are things that are just written to our rule. It doesn't happen that often. I would like to say that most of the folks in our program probably cooperate and are pretty good communicators who cooperate. Again, some of these are just more. These are kind of just outlining the actual rule or law that related to failing to submit reports, growing hemp that's greater than 0.3%, and failure to pay fees. Just to kind of clarify or outline where we're at with enforcement on this. So if somebody grows above the 0.3% THC plus the allowable range, like I said, in our case, it's 0.39 is allowable. The crop does need to be destroyed. We currently have the grower destroy it themselves. One of the conditions for waivering and destroying is that it not leave the farm, that it not enter the stream of commerce, and it not be consumed. Those are probably the three of the biggest ones. Unfortunately, none of those options include any kind of economic value unless you're able to compost it or amend soil with it in a beneficial way. If the DHC is above 4, it is between 0.4 and 1%, the resident can waiver from discipline, or cannot waiver from discipline. Can waiver from discipline, but they need to, again, give us a waiver. And there are civil penalties up to $2,500 per violation. In the cases of more egregious situations where somebody's not cooperating with us, or they're just completely operating illegally, we do have the ability to revocate or suspend their registration and prohibit them from registering in the future. Common issues in Colorado are, this picture is actually taken up in Minnesota last June. I think it was called Minnesota Hemp Farms, and they they were using, this is a biodegradable plastic mulch made from hemp. So it seemed like a kind of a neat product. I know that one of the chief complaints in our state has been this plastic being burned, or plastic tubing, plastic being left behind. Sometimes you have 1 year in, 1 year out growers, or folks, again, either don't have a avenue to get rid of their plastic, or don't dispose of it properly, till it into the ground or burn it. Water use is a hot concern in our state. Using allocated water, with the number of registers we've grown in the last several years, there's been reports of folks using residential well water or tap water to irrigate crops. I think in traditional ag producers understand what their water rights are and don't have issues with water. But I know with a lot of non-conventional ag producers coming to this industry, it's been an issue here in Colorado. Pollen drift is also an issue. We don't regulate pollen. Transportation, we're currently working with requirements, or at least at the time being, for guidance for people to transport to hemp, proper documentation. I think insect and weeds may be covered in the later in the symposium. Volunteer hemp plant seemed to be an issue. Theft of plants, theft of water, and of course in our state, weather, just like any other crop, can affect it. I know this year we had a very hard freeze the first or second week of October that kind of just sent the hemp industry kind of a tailspin as far as trying to get the crop out of the field and protect it and whatnot.
Hi everyone. How are you doing? It's a lot that we're going to discuss. I think those 3 segments we just went through are really key considerations: genetics, agronomy, and then regulatory. The fourth, I think, most important piece is the market, right? Where are you going to take it? So I'm going to expand a little bit on Brian's discussion on USDA regulation. You heard him refer to that, and on certified seed, and then talk about market dynamics. So I'm the CEO of NWG Genetics. I'm also ASTA's Hemp Committee Chair. I'm lucky enough to work with a wonderful colleague there, Pat Miller, who I think is on this call. Hi, Pat. Without further ado, let's look at the agenda. So again, we're going to talk about the impacts of that regulation, certified seed, how it benefits growers, especially in this new crop, market trends, and cost of production and how that plays. We can't really talk about those trends without looking at these costs of production and return on investment for farmers. So, and then I want to leave you with some resources, and then I think we'll have questions. So just a little background on us. There's a lot of people who claim to be experts in hemp, and I even hesitate to call us that because it's only been 6 years, right? For us. So we do have deep agricultural roots. As you can see, our team here, we've worked across species. Most importantly, we have a really strong research component. If you had told me 7 years ago I'd be standing before you as a hemp expert, I would have laughed. But here we are. And I'm humbled to be addressing the Midwest and grateful. We need the Midwest. We need your expertise and your support. And there's great opportunity, and we don't want you to miss it. So overall implications of this USDA, it's incredibly important for the industry, and it's an incredible change. The USDA came out after the 2018 Farm Bill, where they were charged with regulating this. They came out with this thing called the IFR, the interim final rule. So it's final, but only for the interim period, which is about 2 years, I think, 2 to 3 years. The 4 biggest pieces of this that are going to change the industry is that one, there's a requirement to test each field or lot. There's consistent sampling protocols, which really levels the playing field from state to state. There's a tighter definition of total THC. You heard Brian talk about Delta 9 THC. That was not consistent from state to state. Prior to that, different states had different rules. So when you're doing interstate commerce with seed, that was a huge and tremendous risk for farmers. And then the criminal and financial penalties are pretty substantially different. There is not right now incentives for using certified or Department of Ag validated hemp seed. We know the USDA is considering this. We know at the state level right now, you are in a lower risk of testing if you utilize certified ayahuasca certified seed. So they've been approaching that on kind of a state by state basis. And we expect to see the USDA come out with a comment on that. So the USDA got a lot of feedback on this. They are considering making some changes. There was a lot of onerous stuff that would have put departments of ag out of business without support, right? So some of this will change, but doubt the requirement to test each field or lot will change. So, just as a background, most states, they could only conduct a small set of random audits, right? They didn't have enough people. And that, our Department of Ag list that Brian showed you, that really was only 4 people, I think up until last year or, late 2018. It was really small and it was really challenging. So we needed some funds to loosen up. And we did that in a couple of different ways, getting funds from the legislature, but also in the general fund, but also through some fees. So the new IFR language says that all of it must be sampled and tested. This is the piece that's going to change the game. And those samples can't be tested by the farmer. They've got to be collected by a USDA approved sampling agent. And Brian, you're welcome to jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Department of Ag is handling that in our state. And they've been training samplers on how to do that. And a lot of them came from their more traditional crop side. So there's a lot of knowledge there. And I think the industry in Colorado overall feels really comfortable with that. So why do we have to do this? There have been many claims. The hemp industry is highly unfamiliar with federal seed regulations. I've done a number of presentations over the last few hemp conventions on federal seed regulations to try to get them up to speed. You commonly see no labels, like a baggie coming to you, right? I bet some of you have seen that. You also see falsified labels. There's hot seed that is labeled as compliant. There's inaccurate germination rates. So the industry had to learn how to take this to, an appropriate third-party seed lab to get tested, as opposed to utilizing self-testing. And then claims, 100% feminized, claiming that it's certified. And I'm going to talk in a minute about how that word is very special in agriculture, and you cannot just throw it around. And they'll say low compliant THC. And what they mean is if you catch it before it goes over, right? And there's kind of differing views throughout departments of ag, whether that is truly compliant genetics or not. The USDA has asserted, they did come out and say labels have to be in compliance with the Federal Seed Act, and they are going to start enforcement. So this is all about consumer protection. So the Federal Seed Act, super fascinating history, all has to do with food security around World War II. Look it up if you have time. But ultimately, what it needed to do was regulate the seed and vegetable commerce. For the purpose of protecting the consumer and promoting uniformity between states. So the 3 important bullets here, you have to have quality statements. So there are a list of things you have to put on your seed label. And then all of that must be truthful. And here's where, retribution will come if it's not truthful, because it's stated in the law this way. People can come to you or come to their Department of Ag and file, a claim that, hey, this was way off. And you have to keep records. Also in that Federal Seed Act, it established the regulatory standards for a certified seed agency. And this developed into AASCA, and AASCA actually helped them develop this Federal Seed Act. It's a very old organization. So what is certified seed? So that word certified with that capital C is regulated by the Federal Seed Act. You cannot use that word unless your seed has been certified through AASCA or our partners in the OECD. I'll get to that in a second. So AASCA is a multi-country third-party validation that maintains standards for each crop. It validates the variety's genetic purity, the absence of weed, germination, uniformity for harvest. The OECD is Europe and a few other member countries, and we both recognize each other. So any sort seed from OECD is allowed in here and vice versa. Why is this important? You are going to say, again, it's for consumer production, and because you're going to see a number of people claiming certified seed, I'm just going to give you 2 slides here. So you have a background on checking up on that. Is that true or not? I know AASCA has its hands full right now, answering questions from people, but also, looking at folks who are claiming certified and are not, and trying to educate them. So it's and in fact, Chet Miller is from the great state of Illinois. You all may know him. He's the CEO of AASCA. And he's highly, highly involved in our hemp committee with ASTA. And so we have some great experts there. So this is how hemp was certified in the US firstly. And I know this because we were the first company to walk through this with a US bred variety. We had to work with the Department of Agriculture, CDA, as well as Colorado Seed Growers Association. So each state has an entity, almost each state has an entity that enacts the certified seed process according to AASCA standards. So they're members of AASCA. So the first step is that you submit your varietal description to a varietal review board. If that description, that piece of paper is accepted, then in Colorado, the THC trials are conducted by the Department of Ag, and they validate, they grow around 5 different regions. They validate, yes, okay, the seed stayed below 0.3% THC in all of these locations. And then AASCA, or in our case, it was the Colorado Seed Growers Association, stepped in and came to our field and checked that all of these standards that we're required to fulfill were validated. Once that is passed, we received in Colorado 2 labels. Now, each state might handle this slightly differently. What remains the same, so Colorado issued a label saying, yep, this was low stable THC. The AASCA label will be the same across the nation. So this blue tag, the certified seed tag, with the member entity stamp on it that has all these required standards that are listed on a label is what you should see. So if you're not seeing that, then you need to question whether it's certified seed or not. So let's go to the next section. And again, let me just flip back. It's the why. The benefit to you as growers is that this is third-party validated, which is incredibly lacking in the hemp industry. And you might not choose cert seed in typical crops, right? But it's much more important in a new crop. It's absolutely the Wild West still. There's no controls or checks on any seed until now, right, as we phase in the USDA requirements. And there's some outlandish claims. So I just want to give a shout out to AASCA. They're taking their role very seriously, very objective in how they perform their duties. So there is great value right now in using AASCA certified genetics. So this is the story of my life. Over the last 6 years, market data has been just a mess. I mean, there was no history of it. There's lots of history of using this crop, right? But it was illegal, except in Canada and Europe with hemp. So there's very little data, no data in 2014 in the US. It's getting better. So the end of 2018, we started seeing some good repeated data coming out. And I wanted you to have this as a resource because farmers, you need this. It's got pricing on there. Those top 2, Hemp Benchmarks, Pan Exchange, will show you to the best of these, very professional data takers. Pan Exchange is a woman from Cargill. And to the best of their ability to gather what they can, what the current pricing is. So it's highly important when you're making your decisions of what to grow. BDS Analytics there came from the spins world. So there's good people operating, and I recommend that you subscribe to their newsletters. So dramatic change over the last year in the industry. What you see on the left here is biomass pricing from April 2019 to January. So each color is a month. It's price on the vertical axis and months across the bottom. And what we see is an incredible decline in the value of biomass. This $1.31, I've actually seen it down to 90 cents recently. And this is, cannabinoid enhanced. This is CBD enhanced. This is not, just flower from grain varieties. Over here, you see a similar trend in extracts. So these are highly correlated, the price of biomass to the price of extract, wholesale extract. I know a few of you are selling wholesale extract. They've broken it down. This is a little more complicated chart. They've broken it down to the types of extracts. So crude, refined hemp oil, I could not for the life of me figure out what they meant by that. They are not talking about seed oil here. It's some kind of extract. And then they've got tea-free distillate and broad spectrum distillate, which I think there's a good understanding of what these two are. But the same trend we're seeing. And in fact, this is a very high number, both of these, because I've seen it this month as low as $7.50 a kilo. So this is per kilogram. You're not going to see this price likely in more mature markets, at least Colorado, Oregon, Kentucky next year. So this is going to trickle down to the Midwest. So keep these in mind. The other piece, I've done a ton of work with extractors over the years, and mainly I've watched them come and go. There's been a few large ones that have stayed around, and you can get tolling done for as low as $10 a pound now. So we don't recommend that people keep it on the farm, only because this is going to continually innovate. People are going to get larger and larger scale, and you can really trim your costs by utilizing a toll extractor. And this data, by the way, is from Hemp Benchmarks. So when you choose your genetics, everybody, early on in the hemp industry who are not farmers, the first thing they'd ask was, what's your CBD percent? And we would say, is that all you value? Do you value compliance? Do you value the cost of production? Do you value, agronomic traits like what, yield, right? Principally. So we've had to do a lot of education in the industry around that. And some people don't. And if they didn't value, compliance or cost of production, I would say, okay, I would recommend someone else for them to work with. I think this is something we've been working on, and over the past, I would say year, I've always got to update this with new information. These are averages. As you can see, there are substantial costs associated with feminized seed, whether you're utilizing clones or whether you're direct seeding. All of these things I think Rich mentioned really add up. And this testing, not only is it, a pain and at a stressful time, it's costly. It's about $45 a sample when you're testing up so that you can catch it before it goes over the THC amount. It adds up to pretty substantial cost per acre. I've heard from a lot of people, this is really low, this is a little high. But again, they're just averages. What I don't calculate in here are the inputs, because that varies according to your region, and also the drying, which is highly variable region to region. And then on the dioecious side, obviously you producing it like corn, it's not as costly. And again, corn growers, I don't have the inputs in here, but so we're comparing apples to apples though. And then including the seed separation and threshing. When I say trim here on the fem seed side, that is because some of them are producing a product for smokable bud. And I can't get into all the different products, but there's basically smokable CBD flower and then there's extracted products. So when we're comparing, you would not create a smokable flower this way. You don't want to thresh it, right? This is mainly for the larger side of the market, which is extracted products. Again, what's your risk tolerance for the THC if you don't catch it? I don't know how you would value that by the dollar, but there's some pretty, I'm too cautious for that. I would just say that. The American Seed Trade Association has a hemp committee, as I stated. Pat and I work together on that, along with a number of really smart people from a bunch of different companies and from regulatory agencies. We have some documents to help farmers with seed purchasing recommendations. There's 3 of them. I can share them with Marguerite. They're not posted to the website yet. You can, always check in with ESTA's website for more information, but let us know if you want to see those, and we'll get them to Marguerite. So again, just to review, there's another option. You may not have known about it. We at New West have bred, well, actually, first I want you to look over here on the right side. When someone tells you they're getting, a 12, a 15, an 18, in most cases, 90% of the cases, that is the top flower of the plant. It is well known that as you go down the plant, the CBD content decreases because it's just not bred, right, to be consistent. It's what that results in generally. The most, I've given presentations, people come up to me afterward. I've had this 10 to 12% CBD available in the field, and they say, we've never gotten that. We've been producing for 5 years. The most we've gotten is 8. Or last year, in places like Oregon, more mature markets, they have moved to this mechanical production of the bush here, of this feminized type, and they're getting 4% because they're silage chopping, which we don't recommend, right? So it's highly impactful that your genetics and your agronomy work together to get the most CBD out of it for the least price. So this is our variety Abound. It's enhanced CBD post-thresh and threshed according to USDA IFR requirements. This is sitting right around 6%, 6.2%, which is absolutely comparable with what we hear from mature markets who are mechanically harvesting their bushy, more feminized types. So contact info on that if you're interested in more. New West Genetics Abounds. It's compliant. We've got Miss Jenny Boyd, used to work for DeKalb, from Missouri, super familiar with the seed industry, loves to talk to farmers. She would be happy with any questions. So we have additional resources for agronomics, equipment, and extraction and market. So if you're interested in any of those, please do connect with us. We're happy to share. So I'm going to give it back to you, Marguerite.
But the first question, we kind of addressed it in the chat a little bit, but maybe Brian can talk about it a little bit, but about herbicides and maybe other pesticides, and any thoughts on herbicide uptake by the crop and impacts on CBD purity, ability to market, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as being specific to how uptake of an herbicide would affect CBD purity, I mean, I certainly feel it could. I don't have any specific information on that, but any kind of herbicides going to act in different modes on the plant, which would of course potentially harm the cannabinoid output of the plant. The only one, Colorado is very limited, mostly just because, like for the rest of the country, there are federal, regulations. The EPA is not putting hemp on very many things right now. So we kind of took the ball in our own court 5 years ago and established our own list based on label language about what could be used on certain types of crops and what was prohibited by the label. So I think the only thing, to the best of my knowledge, is on our list right now are some pre-emergent herbicides. And I would think that depending on how long the persistence of the soil and that there might be potential for for herbicide use, pre-emergent herbicide use. Of course, that would have to be, done, with seed. I don't think it would work very well unless you were able to seed within, with plastic and spray between rows. So it's true. There's really no viable herbicide use for cannabis now, and I really can't answer the specifics of how it would affect CBD in the crop.
There are a couple more questions that popped up about that, about residues and consumable hemp products, and the plant's potential ability to take things out of the soil outside of just herbicides, and also heavy metals. I don't know if you guys have experienced that in Colorado. I've seen, I think, 4 studies looking at that in various countries, but
We've had a lot of discussion around this study-wide. There's a couple of conflicting studies, and I'll let John speak to it as a phytoremediator, but market-wise, we have EPA regulations for pesticide content in food products, so those are national regulations. We don't have anything special necessarily for hemp in Colorado pesticide limits, but I can tell you there are plenty of consumers who have their limits. So you definitely want to look at who's my target market, what kind of product do they want, and there is extensive testing in cannabis for pesticides, but honestly, we've seen high variability across those testers. So, it's not like just because you're an expert at testing for cannabinoids, you're going to be an expert at testing for pesticides. So, along with this, the thing we didn't mention is all these testing facilities need to come up to speed, because it is highly specialized plant and new testing assays for all of us. But John, what do you know about uptake of heavy metals? I think in general, the hemp plant compared with other plants.
It can, like most plants, it will accumulate, cadmium and other heavy metals that are in the soil. It's still, there are things called hyper accumulators, and an industry around using plants, trees or crop plants to pick stuff up out of the soil. That really hasn't been, hemp hasn't been used for that for a variety of reasons. So it's not, it can do it, but it's not particularly different than any other plant species.
all right, thanks. And then for your kind of variety comparison testing, how were the samples harvested across all of the different competitors in your own varieties? And then how were they processed? And specifically, did you use mechanized or hand harvesting in those comparison plots?
Sure. So they were all swathed and allowed to field dry. So every sample, ours and the competitors, field dried, and then they were mechanically threshed with a small plot thresher, and so then that effectively removed seed from flower, and the flower sample was collected from there.
All right, thank you. And then on the certified topic, there's a question: isn't it easier to get certified clones? So that's kind of a question, kind of a statement.
Yeah, it's those don't exist. If they're saying certified, it's false, and it's breaking federal law. I don't know if Bill Foote is on here from North Carolina. They are working on establishing some standards for feminized seed, but right now there's no AOSCA standards for clones.
Okay. Here's one. Under federal law, do states have the right to grant authorization to non-state samplers for pre-harvest tests?
This might be a Brian question.
Yeah. So I mean, yes, there is an avenue through the IFR for states to to administer or approve their own labs and their own sampling agents. Currently in Colorado, and this year we're going to proceed mostly like we have in previous years. We're gonna through the growing season, we're going to operate under our current rules. But to achieve 100% sampling, we have already put legislation in to the state legislature, and we expect it to be approved. Of course, they've been temporarily suspended because of the virus. But assuming that goes through, we'll have funding very soon to start a basically sampling and testing program, a third-party sampling and testing program, where we will coordinate with our own state lab, add additional state labs that are approved by the Department of Agriculture, and standardize the testing procedure, and also create a training program which will, in effect, train and give third-party samplers a certificate or a license to go out and collect samples, and if they can demonstrate a knowledge and ability to sample the correct way through a series of training and testing. So
Okay.
That's the plan going forward. So yes, that's a definite avenue.
Okay, great. So this question is about organic certification. If any of you can speak to that, but does the feminizing seed process eliminate the possibility of organic certification?
My understanding with working with the NOP, National Organic Program, is that if you are going to use certified, you have to use certified seed. And my suspicion, I can't say this for sure, but my suspicion is if it's not certified by IASCA standards, it's not going to be feminized seed. It's not going to include feminized seed.
All right.
That's the best of my understanding.
So this is about pollination. How will the Dioecious model for hemp impact pollination of medical and recreational marijuana?
So it's, the sad truth is people need access to this plant and they cannot get it. We get pushback from people that grow feminized, but the truth is it's highly costly and our industry will not grow if we only grow that. Now, if you're making I value this whole smokable flower piece and the medical marijuana. We value that. Everyone will have different opinions on it. However, if it's not going to be regulated by the state, there's nothing you can do beyond protecting your grows indoors in greenhouses. So it's the smaller part of the market. The extract is the larger part of the market. And even with high THC, there's no reason to not grow it like a row crop, besides regulation, right? We just want to drive home the fact that this is highly beneficial for these retail product makers. Why would you not want to lower the cost of your production? You have to. We've watched people go out of business, and all of us know it that are in the hemp industry. We've watched them go out of the business because they're spending money left and right, and a big portion of that spending is on production. You don't have to anymore. So I think it's really great news for everyone. John wanted to add to that.
I think there's very few actually harvested and produced outdoor female-only crops that don't have seed in them. And in the Midwest, obviously, you all are familiar with ditchweed, which is dioecious populations, and the presence of those is going to pollinate any crop of females anyway. So having the same genotype with fighting back with its own pollen is actually the best strategy, I think.
So there's a question about testing varieties for THC levels. What is the timeline or date for harvest and testing determined? Is it always the same date?
One piece of regulation that I'll let Brian step in is this statement, at maturity or to maturity. And that, people are using that for a lot of wiggle room. But maybe I'll have Rich talk to what we mean by that, and then maybe Brian, you can speak to what CBA means by that.
Sure. You want me to go first, or
Go ahead.
Yeah. So there has been an idea of basing sampling more on, that's been suggested a lot in the comments that IFR, I know, from industry, about sampling based on planting date. We're not there yet, and of course, still in our rule, we do require people to notify us 30 days before their intended harvest date for a reason, and that's so we can plan our sampling protocol. I would say that, and I don't know if I'm answering this question correctly or not, but we do, I think it's no secret that, of course, the longer the crops in the ground, the lower, as was mentioned in the first presentation, the higher the content of THC is going to go up. So, we have attempted in the past to do it within as much time as possible, not waiting till 2 days before harvest, but trying to get, a couple weeks in before harvest. That's difficult. It's, I think this last year, we did, announce to our folks that they were being inspected at the end of August or the first week of September. And so the majority of them that harvested later in September, it was fine. We were able to get samples in a timely manner. I think one thing that the rest of the countries and us are struggling with is the fact that the federal rules are requiring that all samples be collected within 2 weeks of harvest, which makes it even more difficult. I think I mentioned earlier that with as large as our industry was, it took 21 days to get the sample from the field and analyzed and reported back to the farmer. So the 2 week requirement would make that even more of a restriction.
So there's a little bit of clarification specifically for varieties being tested at universities. So especially if they're testing hot varieties.
Yeah, Rich, maybe speak to how we've bred it, and then John could speak to, how we've harvested and the timing and how that relates to breeding. And then John to the university protocol, because he's done variety trials.
So for us, the definition of maturity has always been, when is the grain also mature? Because we are interested in harvesting both, and that's when we would be interested in what the cannabinoid content is. So typically when some of the seeds are starting to fall off of the cola, that's when we would call maturity, and that's when we would harvest viable seed, as well as then collect our flower tissue sample for cannabinoid analytics.
John?
The question of how we sampled the crops based, this was at Colorado State University. We had we were regulated by the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and we followed their sampling protocol in terms of only threshing out the seeds and the stems, and only using the flower to calculate the percent THC and other cannabinoids by weight. And we did that at maturity, and followed publications from your labs in Italy where they had done similar studies.
Then we did get a response from Shelby Ellison just about the organic and feminized seed. She said you cannot apply ethylene inhibitor to an organic plant or in an organic field. You may harvest pollen from a treated plant and apply it to certified organic plant or field. And maybe when it's her time to speak, she may want to talk about that more. She may get more questions. So then we have another question. I live in northern Wisconsin where there is minimal agriculture. Is there a way for me to access dioecious planting and harvesting equipment for doing 10 to 20 acres? Maybe somebody in Wisconsin can respond to that one more specifically, though. Shelby, do you have any response for that one?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I did. Right below the next one, I listed our networking forum through UW Extension that a lot of people post equipment that they have. So if you check out that link, you can go and ask for particular types of equipment, list where you are in the state, and try to find people that way. I think right now that's probably the best avenue.
I have heard that there is an issue with having seed and biomass for CBD extraction is undesirable for oil quality due to taste. How true is this?
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. However, the good news is we extract our flower when we do our seed bulk ups, and we have no problem separating seed and flower. And in fact, extractors say, because it's consistent genetics, that we have some of the most consistent biomass for extraction, which makes their lives easier. So any kind of chunky flower, even if it doesn't have seeds, is not it's not the optimum state for extractors to use. So you want to be threshing somehow, even without seed, before you extract, because it exposes the most, to the whatever ethanol or butane, whatever you're using, exposes the most amount of surface area to the extractor.
I'm going to talk a little bit about our production, one of the struggles we had, and then I can pass it on. But for Indiana hemp production, in 2019, we had about 5,300 acres registered. We see about 4,000 acres actually planted and a little over 3,000 acres actually harvested. It was a really wet year. Growers couldn't get in the ground, so that was a definite issue. That's why we see that smaller acreage actually planted. And then we had even less harvested. One of the big reasons for us is we had some non-compliant crops when it came to THC production. So growers couldn't harvest their crop. They had to actually destroy it, unfortunately. And then some just wanted to do research. They had no intention of entering it into the marketplace, even though in Indiana you can sell your harvested hemp. They just wanted to destroy it anyway. They were doing pretty small scale production. In Indiana, we have fiber, grain, and cannabinoid production. We did have a couple of people direct seed for cannabinoids with not a ton of success. It was wet again. We had issues with germination, and then weed management was a serious issue for our growers. We have indoor production as well. Last year we had 1.7 million square feet registered, but only about 300,000 actually planted and a little over 300,000 harvested. When we look at what our 2020 estimated production is, right now we have 192 licenses approved in the state for growers and handlers, about 6,000 acres registered, and about 1.67 million square feet registered in the state. For anybody that's interested in license applications and they don't know, kind of Indiana's deal, we have a requirement that research has to be conducted with an advisor at an institute of higher learning. So you're working directly with faculty or staff like myself, or with county extension educators. Doesn't have to be Purdue specific though. You can work with any advisor at an institute of higher learning. There's a little statement checkbox that verify you have a contract for your crop, whether that's a letter of intent or an actual contract, or you're processing it yourself. We don't need to see that verification. You just have to check a box, and we're holding you to your word, and hopefully you have it sold, because that was a serious issue for us as well as growers in other states. We do have minimum requirements for space. So for indoor production, we have a minimum of 2,000 square feet or 1,500 seedlings or clones, and then 300 mature plants. We're not going to go in and count, or the state chemist doesn't rather. For CBD production, it's a minimum of 1 acre or 1,500 plants, and then grain and fiber would be 20 acres. You also have to have a little checkbox stating that you reviewed the varieties that were grown in Indiana. And if they have a history of going hot, you're aware of that. You're assuming that risk if you decide to purchase that particular variety and plant it. And then we have entirely electronic applications in our state for 2020. So for transporting hemp in Indiana, because we do have some processors, and we actually have a pretty large scale processor up in Michigan City, so really close for Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin growers. We're looking for, raw hemp material to go to those places, that there's a copy of the license or license number. If it's coming from out of state, they obviously don't have to have an Indiana license, but we want it to be transported with an actual copy of that information when it's coming into the state. We're looking at certificate of analyses and compliancy test results, and I'll talk about that in a second, kind of the issue we've seen. And then, of course, a bill of lading with intended use, intended destination, and the amount being transported. I know this talk focused on seeds and not clones, but we have people that are bringing in clones, seedlings, and seeds into the state of Indiana. So again, we're going to look for a copy of the license from that out-of-state holder. We're going to look for an Indiana seed permit. So if it's a seed seller, even if they're outside of the state, they need to have an Indiana seed permit. I'm sure this is true in every other state that they have their own seed permit programs, but they just need to get that license through our Office of Indiana State Chemist. It's different than a hemp license. It's just a seed license for anybody selling any kind of seed in Indiana. And then again, intended destination and the amount of material being transported. So with the certificate of analysis issue that we've seen is that we have seen false or doctored C of A's. This is common, not in just Indiana, but across the country. What we found the best solution to be, and this actually just happened about 2 weeks ago, is calling the actual lab. You can see there's a kind of blurry QR code up in the corner of this photo. That QR code was broken. It didn't actually work. I tried to scan it with my phone and it was so blurry that it couldn't pick anything up. But we called the lab and asked them about these test results, and they said they had no record of it. And that's one of the ways you can kind of vet any kind of company you're trying to purchase through, is just call the third-party lab that they tested through and see if it's a legitimate C of A. Because you can see here we have 15% CBD, and we have compliant total THC, but verifying with the lab showed that this was actually not a test done by them. It was a doctored document. So kind of the thing that I've told my growers in the state when they call me and say, hey, I found a variety that is supposed to be 18% CBD and it's non-detectable THC. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. We all, want to find that golden ticket, that kind of perfect variety, but we're just not at that point, and we're not going to see those really high CBD content while still remaining compliant on THC. So just tell growers to be wary of that. Do your homework, look into companies, call labs, and try to figure that out. And then I want to talk a little bit about the research we're focusing on this year and our kind of core hemp team. So we have Dr. Jana Beckerman, who is our plant pathologist that has been working on hemp since 2015. She's continuing to work on hemp. We just got an organic agriculture research and extension initiative that she's a part of. We have Dr. Ron Turco in agronomy, who has been very involved in hemp production since 2015. Dr. Kevin Gibson, a weed scientist who focuses on organic production of crops, who will be working on research this year. Dr. John Couture, an entomologist, does a lot with remote sensing and reflectance spectroscopy. So he's going to continue work. And then Dr. Maria Marshall, who is in agricultural economics and is looking at the feasibility of hemp production in the state of Indiana. So really excited to have a strong team, as well as some other members joining us, including Dr. Elizabeth Long and Dr. Laura Ingwell in entomology, Dr. Stephen Meyer in horticulture, and Dr. Ariana Torres in horticulture, as well as some other people from satellite campuses that will be working with our growers. This is my contact information. Also, you should have gotten an email, or most people should have gotten an email from me today that has all this contact information, but feel free to reach out if you have further questions regarding Indiana, this webinar, any future events. I'm happy to answer them.
All right, everybody, Philip Alberti here. I am the University of Illinois Extension Educator up in Freeport, but I do cover a lot of the state. As many of you similarly might have kind of stumbled across hemp as a necessary action to take. And so in the last year, we've done a lot of work trying to get the best information we can out to our growers as they're figuring it out. Keep it in mind, as they've said before, we're all trying to figure this out. I would like to take a minute here to say thank you to the New West team. You did a fantastic job bringing a lot of the issues we've seen and experienced over the last year ourselves across the state of Illinois. And so there's a lot of great points in there. I really appreciate you taking the time to go over those issues as we're learning about this new crop. So first things first, who to contact if you're in Illinois or in the region really, and you want to know who's involved in hemp. We have quite a few people involved on campus, including Alan Parrish, who is the director of our research farms and is going to be running our hemp grain and fiber trials across the state this year. And then we have a variety of folks on campus who are taking a lead in some of the work that we're hoping to do moving forward here. Regarding extension work, myself, Philip Alberti, and then educators Chelsea Harbach and Talon Becker are going to be some of the point people. So if you need any information from what we're doing or looking for local resources, that's going to be the people you want to reach out to. We're open. Just reach out and we will get back to you. Some of our key goals for research are going to be to develop best management practices for hemp in Illinois, develop applications for processing and product development with folks on campus and involving things like agricultural products, paper products, hempcrete, which is already being, projects are already underway on campus as we speak. And then identifying the limitations of crop development within the state of Illinois. So just a couple bullet points here for some of the plans we have for 2020 with regards to cannabinoid production. We are doing a large-scale grower-led research trial across the state and collaborating with our labs on campus to do some cannabinoid profiling across the state. Something I thought that was brought up very well earlier was that there's a lot of quote-unquote varieties going around from different companies and suppliers which are not performing the same because they are in fact not the same. And so we are looking to see where these varieties, where these genetics are coming from, and we're going to be doing sampling throughout the growing season to determine cannabinoid development at flowering, looking at things also like flowering duration, days to flowering, insect disease pressure. Some of our pathologists and entomologists on campus, Nick Sider and Nathan Klashevsky, and then hopefully looking over at overall plant yield as well. With regards to grain and fiber, we're going to have some large-scale grain and fiber trials across the state, and I would be glad to talk to you more about that. But we're going to be running basic agronomy trials similar to what's being done in other areas, following a very similar dual-purpose protocol. I'd be glad to talk more about that if you are interested. If you are a CBD grower in the state of Illinois, you're doing significant acreage or significant selection of various varieties, I would love to talk to you about how we can work together to get some of that data for cannabinoid production. So a quick state update. In 2019, Illinois did what they do and they went at it. So we had 925 applications received for 22,000 acres. But when it was all said and done, we had about 7,000 acres planted and about 5,200 acres harvested at the end of the season. So quite a significant deviation. We had a very wet spring. Things didn't work out as well as they planned. And then as you can see, we left quite a bit of hemp in the field. We're curious to see how those things are going to change moving forward. But as of now, as of March 2020, we have 623 cultivation licenses currently approved for the growing season and 279 processor licenses, although I do not know if that is for extraction, packaging, trimming, things like that. So there's a lot of unknowns currently, but we expect that acreage to be fairly similar. So the big things I really wanted to touch on with regards to the state of Illinois is our rules and regulations currently are for 0.3% Delta-9 THC. So we are a Delta-9 state, being quite different than the 0.3% total THC threshold designated by the USDA rules, and which a lot of other states are actually following. So this is important because we're going to be following these pilot program rules in Illinois for at least this next growing season. And on October 31st, 2020, we will kind of fold into the USDA rules, if you will, where that pilot program will expire. This has brought up a lot of questions from growers about what happens when October 31st ends. We're in November 2020, and now we have biomass or material that tests above that 0.3% total THC. What's going to happen? And the current plan right now is that material will be what we call marked for as an intermediate product and will be allowed to be used for extraction, but not for smokable flower production or for sale for smokable flower. So that's kind of the route that we're going. What I really want to point out is that if you are growing industrial hemp and you are looking to take this across state lines for processing, extractions, whatever, make sure you're following the state rules that you're going into, because you will then be taking what is technically considered marijuana from the state of Illinois, or hemp in the state of Illinois, taking it out of the state where it becomes marijuana. So be very careful about that. And I wanted to bring that to your attention. And this is just a real kind of quick update. I'm sure many of you are aware of looking at some of these COAs here, but so we have a non-detectable delta-9 and a total THC of 0.294 in that variety, or that particular test, which indicates it would be compliant in both the state of Illinois and following the USDA federal rules. You'll see that on the Hawaiian haze on the right has a non-detectable delta-9, but a total THC of 0.628, which would make it legal in the state of Illinois as hemp, but marijuana in other parts of the country. So please be aware of these types of things when you are doing any type of interstate commerce. And as always, just make sure you're caught up on the rules and regulations. It's better to be prepared. With that, that's all I really wanted to update folks on as we move in. But a great webinar, glad to be a part of it, and I'm here to answer any questions. I will go ahead and put my contact information in the chat box. Thank you very much, Marguerite.
Hello, my name is Shelby Ellison. I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I work in the Department of Horticulture and dabble in hemp extension. So mostly I'm going to be presenting the research that we conducted in 2019 and talk about what our plans are for 2020. A little bit about 2019, we had approximately a little over 1,200 growers. There were almost 17,000 acres licensed in the state of Wisconsin, but only 5,000 were planted, and about roughly half to 2/3 of that were harvested. As of January, late January, planting or harvest reports were still coming into DACAP, so they're working on getting all of that compiled. If you email someone at DACAP in the hemp program, they will give you those final numbers. But something to mention is that of our tests in the state of Wisconsin, there was roughly a 14% testing hot rate by the end of the season. So similar to some other states, but overall fairly regular between, or consistent between 2018 and 2019, with that 14% of the crop having to be destroyed. So specifically relating to the research that we did at UW this past year, there's a number of researchers on campus looking at different aspects of hemp. So Dr. Rodrigo Worley, who's in the Department of Agronomy, and Dr. Carrie Lebowski ran a dual purpose variety looking at grain and fiber in 2 locations, looking at different varieties, and they had different seeding rates and different nitrogen rates. They also conducted a variety trial looking at 15 different varieties between fiber and dual purpose varieties. So everything that I'm going to talk about right now, there will be extension bulletins that are being produced and will be put on our UW Hemp Extension website, which I'll have listed in the next slide. Dr. Rodrigo Worley is also a weed scientist by training, so he's very interested in looking at herbicide tolerance in hemp and has done several pre and post emergence evaluations looking at different herbicides and different rates. So I've conducted the majority of the CBD research for UW, including running a variety trial last year with 6 different varieties, and also working with Dylan Bruce and Westar Organics, looking at how nitrogen, this was an organic trial, but looking at different common organic applications of nitrogen or other nutrients, how that affects cannabinoid content throughout time. Again, these things will be posted on our website, so I'll just link to that next. So we had another researcher, Dr. Aaron Silva, specifically looking at organic considerations for planting in grain hemp production, looking at different planting dates, row spacing, and ways of weed management. Dr. Brian Luck conducted a harvest. He had 10 acres of grain that was planted and has a very nice bulletin put together on combine specifications for harvesting dual purpose, looking at grain and fiber. I've also been actively collecting feral hemp throughout the state, and if anybody on the webinar is interested in telling me about any of their feral hemp, that is both a useful source of genetics, and we're trying to repopulate the nation's cannabis sativa, or specifically hemp germplasm bank. And then we have 2 very large surveys. Maybe some of you on the call actually participated in the Hemp National Needs Survey. So the results from that, we had over 1,100 participants. And that survey I am working on finalizing. I was supposed to present it at a conference last week that was unfortunately canceled, but we'll be making that available through a webinar coming up this spring. And there was also a Wisconsin-specific hemp marketing study that was conducted over 2018 and 2019. So those links right there, the hemp extension website through UW, we're constantly putting things up there. There's different webinars and different extension bulletins from our 2019 research. The second link there is for that hemp marketing survey. That's my email. There was one other thing that I wanted to mention about that. I'll just say that Wisconsin is a total THC state, so not like Illinois. So we include the THCA by 0.877 plus total plus Delta 9. So do know that for Wisconsin. And yeah, we'll be continuing almost all of this research we did in 2019. The plan is to continue again in 2020. So variety trials, fertility trials, unless we can't go outside. But that's all for now. Thanks.
And then there was a question really quick in the chat box about Indiana and Wisconsin as far as THC. Indiana is also a total THC state. So we are not just Delta 9. So just a heads up for anybody who is curious.
This is James DeDecker from Michigan. I just want to share a little bit of information like the other land grant folks as to what we're up to here at MSU. Our regulatory agency is Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, or MDARD. So we're still functioning under a pilot research program this year in 2020. Just a little bit of information. There's the link to the MDARD page for anyone that's in Michigan that wants more information or wants access to the forms and instructions to actually apply to become a grower or a processor handler. This was our numbers from 2019 as far as actual licenses go. We had 541 growers with just over 32,000 approved acres. And then we also had 389 processor handler licenses that were issued in the state. MDARD did administer a survey over the winter here of 2019 participants. However, we haven't seen any of that data yet. So unfortunately, we don't know exactly how many were planted or harvested or some of the other production practices. So we're really looking forward to some of that information coming out soon. The data that we do have is from MDARD's lab. So they had one lab through MDARD testing for regulatory compliance for THC. This is the whole data set here, 820 samples submitted. 84% of those were below 0.4. I have 0.4 there because Michigan was one of the states that went up to 0.399 in our testing for last year, and we'll continue that this year. However, once, of course, we go over to the new interim rule that will change based on lab uncertainty, which we're told is going to be at 0.37 for MDARD for 21. This is a truncated version of that same data set, just looking at everything less than 1% THC, and we really see that pattern that was in some of the New West data there when they looked at some of the competitors' genetics versus theirs, and I thought that was really compelling. So same issue, our growers have had a hard time getting their CBD up there to where their processors wanted above that 6-7% threshold while still remaining compliant. These were our most popular varieties. I also really appreciated the comments from the folks at New West about the fact that these variety names really don't mean anything, and it's very difficult to know what you're working with based on labeling that's not sufficient or non-existent, and just people not doing a great job with their breeding and seed certification practices. So this is what we have to go on at this point. Obviously, a lot of cherry varieties, and I lumped all the different cherry varieties here just because we don't know, one cherry wine from the next cherry blossom. and then Young Sim, Bayox, and Wife, and you can see the compliance levels for those most popular varieties. And obviously, very few samples coming in from any of the other material, but there were many different varieties that were listed and grown in Michigan last year. I do want to show just a little bit of our data real quick from variety work. Now, this was a grain and fiber trial that we conducted, but really experienced, I think, the difference between some of this material that we tested from Canada and on the grain side versus what we've seen in the CBD world. Because we're over already, I won't go into too much detail. I just want to show you these is the list of varieties that we included. Again, grain or dual purpose for fiber in some cases as well. This was early maturity material coming mostly out of Canada from a couple of different companies. And you can see still stand establishment was a challenge with direct seeding, even this fairly high quality seed. Some of that was our learning curve about how to establish hemp. And some of that, too, I think, was seed quality on some of these varieties, even on the grain side. Some photos of our plots last year and some of the insects and disease issues that we encountered. The one thing I want to point out relative to the conversation today is that everything that we tested was compliant when it came to THC, but CBD was not there. Again, these are varieties bred for grain, so they're not going to have that same amount of CBD, but if we could be selecting from genetics like this or related genetics that are stable on the THC side, but better for CBD, would be in a really good place. We did collect both flower, thresh that out for grain yields, and then also redded the stems and bundles for fiber yields, and you can see how that came out here. So this is grain yield, pounds of dry grain. We averaged 980 and some varieties up over 1,400. And then fiber. What you see here is our Mechanized varieties were much taller, much higher fiber yields, even though some of them are listed as grain varieties. This is where you can get information on hemp from MSU. It's our hemp website here. We're trying to post all materials available, a lot of different formats and information being updated pretty consistently. And then here's my contact information, also my colleague Eric Anderson, who I think is on the webinar today, on the field crop side, and some of our faculty working in hemp from field crops perspective. And then we have greenhouse people as well. It's really interesting to see how this is going to evolve with some of this broad acre approach for dual purpose crops. And I think that is an exciting way forward, and I absolutely agree about a lot of the points that were made today. So thanks, Marguerite, for putting this together, and everybody else for sticking around.
Yeah, thank you. And before we get into questions, I just want to thank our speakers from New West Genetics, as well as Philip, James, and Shelby. Appreciate you guys helping me get this together so quickly. I know it was kind of last minute, but I appreciate that. So thank you guys. So we have a question specifically for Philip regarding being labeled an intermediate product that seems to be more financially beneficial option for most producers compared to destroying. Is this only an option in Illinois?
So as I currently understand it, the reason for this happening was just given the kind of weird situation we found ourselves in with the rules and regulations and then the interim rules with the USDA. And so in the USDA rules, it states that, each state pilot program will continue to follow that pilot program until, that set date of, I believe, October 31st, 2020. And so because we are a Delta 9 state, unlike a lot of the other pilot programs, which are total THC states, they wanted to make sure that they are protecting the growers who grow product from either this past year, or into 2020, that they will not have a crop that is compliant one day and non-compliant the next. And so it's kind of a difficult situation, and that's the reason for that transition tag almost. But I do not believe that's going to be something that's happening elsewhere. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just because we're kind of in a unique situation in the state of Illinois and how our rules are going to kind of fold into the federal.
So this is about the interim final rule. Does anyone have any knowledge of portions of the IFR that may be removed or changed prior to the 2020 growing season? Or does no one know until it actually happens? I will say I heard there was a change about the DEA lab requirement. So in there it said all testing labs must have a DEA license, and I think they scratched that. Correct me if I'm wrong. That was the talk, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago about removing that requirement. I'm not sure about.
Yeah, the USDA, they suspended the enforcement of it, but they didn't scratch it. They have submitted the enforcement of it, I believe until next year, until it becomes final.
Okay, and Brian, do you have any other insight on anything that may be changed?
Well, I mean, the two things that they addressed were suspending the enforcement of the DEA requirement for labs, and the other thing that they have suspended the enforcement on is the DEA requirement for reverse distributor or disposal by law enforcement. So it sounds like they're going to be agreeable to states like Colorado and other states, Kentucky and other states that monitor and supervise their own disposal, or more or less having the farmers self-dispose of it versus getting law enforcement involved in it. Obviously, that's just a prohibitive measure. There's no really reasonable avenue to do that. I think they recognize that. But, again, that's been suspended. The enforcement's been suspended until the rule becomes final. But I have not got any word about what the final rule will be on that.
Something regarding the question about being fit for commerce, I do know that Illinois just approved that sales of hemp products under the hemp pilot program can be sold and then processed to those in the cannabis cultivation, so those at the dispensaries. So this allows some of those craft grow operations and the dispensaries to use products from the Industrial Hemp Act, which is something that was not legal before. And so now that opens the channel for distribution and processing. So just wanted that to be aware. Illinois craft operations or recreational facilities can take material produced under the Hemp Act from Illinois and other licensed operations outside of the state. So it's kind of a unique development, and I would encourage people to get updated on that as well.
And what we've done in Indiana, and this will obviously change after the final rule is completely finalized, and we go away from our state pilot program that we're continuing to run this year. But we allowed growers who had non-compliant fiber crops. We didn't have any non-compliant grain crops, but we have it written in our emergency rules that if they're non-compliant for grain or fiber, as long as that grain is going into a food market and it's cleaned, and the fiber is immediately cut and left to rot in the field for a minimum of 15 days, they can actually sell it. That doesn't have a solution for CBD or cannabinoid specific producers, but for grain and fiber growers, we did have to find a solution that, it was pretty easy to do to allow them to just cut it and leave it in the field, because last year we did have non-compliant fiber hemp because there was a land race from China. So that's kind of how we've handled it and how we'll handle it again in 2020. Do Michigan growers also have the option to sell hemp products to medical marijuana markets? Or is it just in Illinois?
Provided that they have, a license from Michigan, certificates of analysis that follow compliance, they will be able to do that. That's correct. I'm looking currently to get the PDF, Marguerite, for that. If I can't find it before we end here, I will send it to you to get out to the rest of our attendees.
All right, with that, I am going to wrap it up. Thank you everyone for speaking, and thank you to all the participants for getting on, and I appreciate all the great questions. And if you have further questions, feel free to email me or any of our speakers, and we can help you out. But thank you so much, and hopefully you have a great rest of your day.